to have two who are almost like my students, right? With me here. And with Subhranshu also, we've had a long association because School of Media has quite often, actually, once in a while, had some kind of engagement with sport. We had this, we were just talking about a really enjoyable conference on football once. I don't remember when, but we did, which is I think where we, something like that, we are long ago. And we had fans, the place was full of fans, football fans. And so there were the East Bengal sitting there, the fans sitting there, the Mohun Bagan fans sitting there, and they were all arguing, and it was great fun. We had stars come in and talk about their experience. So that was also a really interesting conference that we had. And now, of course, with Suman, also like a student, and others from the Spa University, the School of Media is going to go into yet another. And of course, Parshini also was heavily associated with the School of Media. Her major project, as Kovachit said, which she was commissioned to do by the government of India, about something that now has hit the headlines over the last couple of years, about sexual harassment within the training systems in Sai and other places, kind of experiences, how to make sport more, more attractive for women athletes as well as male athletes, especially from so-called underdeveloped areas. How sports could be used as a kind of way of bringing young people into the mainstream. All kinds of things were part of her project that she was doing then. So School of Media has been engaged with the issue of sport for a long time, and we are already running late. So without taking too much time, I'd request Dr. Suman Ghosh to talk about this project basically and introduce all of us to their concerns. And I personally, though it doesn't look like it, also used to play a lot of sports when I was young, and I believe that women should play a lot of sports. And today's discussion so far has been more about the stars. I think that what I'm more interested in is how sports and women come together in our everyday normal kind of life as well, because India is not a sporting nation. We like watching sports, we like spectacle, but we don't play. I mean, people say, oh, I'm a great cricket fan. Oh, you play cricket? No, I don't play cricket, I watch cricket. This is the typical answer that you get from people. So we don't have a very sporting culture. And the traditional sports and games that we grew up with, when there were more fields, when girls and boys used to play together, we used to play traditional kind of games. Those have all, definitely in the urban areas and now increasingly in the rural areas, those games are dying out. We don't have those, we used to play with stones or balls or, just makeshift kind of props. We don't see kids doing that anymore either. So whatever, the traditional culture of games is dying out, I think, and the culture of spectator sports, of huge global events, those have taken that place. So I think that what Suman will be talking about, I hope, will include some of those issues.
A little bit. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Gupta. It is really very nice to be back in Jadavpur, and a huge thank you from all of us visiting from Baspa University for creating this event. And it's a very, very impressive lineup indeed. So there's a lot more excitement and a lot more ideas, I think, that we are expecting in the course of the next few hours. On behalf of all of us from ASPA, we really appreciative of the kind of welcome that we have been having at Jadavpur. I'd like to say a little bit about the nature of the project, because ultimately it is the project that has brought all of us here. What is this project? Her Game, Her Story is a project that signifies a collaboration between Professor University, Jadavpur University, and Sportsworks, and it is obviously, as we have heard, funded by the British Council, which is why you see the logos of these three organizations who are partner organizations, including a brand new logo, and I can see Lizzie and Pete seeing for the first time what the brand new logo of Professor University is, because that is something that was inaugurated yesterday evening. So this is about as fresh as they possibly come.
We're having a logo premiere.
We are having a logo premiere, a mini logo premiere at Jadavpur University. Oh, goodness gracious. Her game, her story. India. This is the India leg, and there is a Bath leg. And in all of this, Obhijit, Professor Roy, has been not merely an enthusiastic collaborator, but also great support and a great, a great source of ideas. I'd also mention very especially Duti, who has been working over the past couple of days and is going to be such an important part of this project. And I think with the kind of involvement of teachers, departments across Jadavpur University, departments of physical education, department of School of Media, and other departments of Jadavpur, and when we have an event in Bath later on, what we will be able to create is a project which is meaningful. And this is where hopefully it will address a couple of the expectations that Professor Gupta has just laid out before us. This project has not merely a set of objectives, but a set of ideas. Some of these are medium term, some of these are in the form of a training program. A training program that we want to create, and this is the what of the project. What are we trying to do? We are trying to create a training program in women's sports for current and aspiring media professionals, which aims to inculcate awareness and understanding of key issues. And these key issues around women's sport include inequalities in gender, identity, visibility, profile, participation, pay, inclusivity, and much more. It will therefore be based on a lot of research, it will be evidenced, it will be based also equally on student aspirations, and it is wonderful to see a lot of students in this room, and we hope to hear from you in terms of what you think a program such as this might be able to bring for you in terms of the ways in which you see the direction forward for women's sport. It is about aiming to enhance the professional capabilities and the experience around representations of women's sport in the media. But along with that, these programs, you create a program, what happens to it? How is it sustained? So from a sustainability point of view, what you have is the second output. And that second output is a curated database. A curated database with research and analysis. Research and analysis which chronicles attitudes towards issues concerning gender equality in women's sport. But it is to be used as a resource for delivering the certificate, but also has a further medium and hopefully a longer term aim, because it will also have a lot of material that will be useful for research in this very emerging area. So there are two outputs, but along with these two outputs, there is a sense in which these outputs are geared towards certain kinds of impact. So the curriculum in the database will have to aspire towards sensitization. I think sensitizing is a word that Obhijit has used a couple of times, and that is a crucial word for a project such as this one. It was about creating an impact on the understanding and representations, but across sport media. And that includes not merely television media, but a wide range of media platforms. And when we hear from Lizzie, Pete, and many of the other presenters today, hopefully we will have a sense of how these media platforms have such a crucial role to play in terms of creating awareness or understanding of these issues. It will hopefully also, it will be directed towards having an impact on sports administration, on sports policy, and this is where bringing in ideas, whether it's legal frameworks or whether it's other ideas, more complex ideas, such as the ones that Vaishni talked about in her presentation, influencing policy, influencing communities, influencing activism. That is basically what this digital showcase aspires to do. It aspires to create a resource, and the curriculum aspires to create that ability for these avenues to be pursued in terms of a kind of longer-term impact. The online database also has a more specific aspiration to build subsequent input, a subsequent output in the form of an awareness course for sporting instructors in schools. Because what happens to a project like this? We take it to media professionals, we take it to create an impact, and that impact creates a certain amount of awareness. What happens then? The next step then will be to take it to schools. And that is where, at ground level, it makes a difference. To come back to Professor Gupta's hope, it is not merely about creating those champions, but it is also about creating that difference in culture, which has as one possible output the creation of champions, but has a much bigger impact in terms of enabling a shift into a culture of sport which is societal. So that is part of the aspiration. So there are immediate aspirations, but there are medium and longer term aspirations. And these are aspirations which this project marks the start of. Okay? Why are we doing this? The what, hopefully, is clear. The why is a little more complex. And why are we doing this is obviously not a kind of throwaway question. It is a question which has a certain structure to it. Why are two universities across different continents, one from the UK and the other from India, collaborating on something like this? Why have industry involved? So the why has sort of specifics. Now, in terms of public priorities, the Indian government has very clear priorities, and some of these priorities seem to be making clear shifts. So the successes of the Khelo India scheme, and this is from the Press Information Bureau, there are very clear sort of indicators in terms of the shifts that it has enabled. So we can see the statistics up there. 161% increase is not to be sniffed at. A 223% increase in the number of female athletes being supported under the scheme. What it says is, beyond the statistics, beyond these numbers, what it says is that there is a greater degree of investment in sport or in sporting infrastructure that is part of the current government narrative. Now, as a narrative, I think that that is actually something which is a step in the right direction. A greater emphasis on sport, a greater investment in sport, and that investment will, any investment on the part of one party, if it is of a significant nature, will also bring in investments. That is usually the way market economics works, and we will say a little bit about the market later on. But it brings in investments from other sectors as well, and where it makes an impact, that impact is obviously a societal impact which everybody benefits from. This project is also in line with the UK government's priorities in promoting female participation in sport as part of formal education. When we grew up, for instance, we had in school, you have a history period, a geography period. For sport, you have a PT period, a physical training period, or a physical education period. And the structure of that period is actually something that is left to physical instructors, depending on the nature of the school, depending on the nature of the preferences or the capabilities of individual physical instructors, this, that, and the other. Something a little more structured, the order, to which a lot of curricula have since then moved on. but it has actually had a huge impact. In the UK, for instance, as part of formal education, this prioritization of female participation in sport has become a force for social change. So female athletes are now seen by 48% of the public as role models, and that is a huge thing. And this is from the UK Sport website. So we can see that the impact can actually have sort of meaningful effects. Societies need role models. Somewhere, when we talk about the media and media representations of sport, there is a question: is this market-led? Is this market-driven? I think it would be impossible to deny that it is to a certain extent. But then it is difficult to deny that the market plays a crucial role in enabling anything that is new, or at least most things that are new. The market had a huge role in giving cinema the kind of platform for success which allowed it to experiment with mainstream and art house forms. The market has played a huge role in all creative forms. The market plays a huge role in terms of the ways in which sports is appreciated and received in contemporary society. So if Deloitte are now conducting huge surveys on breaking the $1 billion barrier in women's sport, then that is something which tells you that the market is shifting in that direction. But I will draw your attention to the word elite sports. Right? That is complex. I won't use the word problematic yet, but it is complex. But the thing is that even if there is a shift towards the elite, that space will eventually be challenged by the subaltern. And in that, there will always be that capacity for a victory in the right direction. And similarly, the other statistic which tells you about the global excitement, and this is global, the global excitement for the 2023 Women's World Cup, and it tells you how significant the rise in sports viewership is. It tells us a little bit about the ways in which media representations play a massive part. Now, my talk started with women's sports, the media, and the wider humanities. I said the wider humanities because I didn't want to use the term applied humanities, but what has humanities got to do with it? And my answer is everything. We keep reading about things like a crisis in the humanities and the university, a brief history of the present crisis, why the humanities matter more than ever, even when you keep hearing otherwise. My point is that the humanities has everything to do with this. It is about telling the stories of athletes. It is about telling those individual stories which allow them to overcome their circumstances and move on to something which is part of a dream that they want to pursue, part of an identity towards which they aspire. So it is about narrative, it is about ideology, it is about an understanding of history, it is about an understanding of the politics of sport, it is an understanding of sociology, and it is an understanding of economics. It is an understanding of all of these things. So in that sense, humanities probably is the greatest driving force that programs such as this can have. They are enriched, informed, and stimulated by the humanities. So that is basically the nature of the project. That is the kind of framework, the critical and conceptual framework that drives this project, and that is the set of aspirations that we want to work towards. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. I think Suman effectively brought in everything that needed to be brought in here. We'll come back to this maybe, or do you want to, if anyone has any clarifications or questions to Suman, maybe we can do that, because Subhranshu will be talking about more specific information, I think. So, anyone has any questions to ask? Or just leave them for all together. Yeah, okay. So, let's do that. Just, oh, sorry, yeah.
Please. It's like you have mentioned about the elite sports. You are mentioning some sports specific or the level of the players?
Oh,
Good question. What I showed you there was a certain market trend. This is a survey that is commissioned by Deloitte, right? And what they're trying to do is to create an economic package around what they think are elite sports. What we sometimes forget is that once that inroad has been made, it creates the space for everything else, and that is how the kind of wider engagement with all aspects of sport will actually happen. So in that sense, even when there is a chip made on that glass wall, I'm not talking about ceilings here, if there's a chip made against that glass wall, that chip will actually broaden and increase.
so why don't you give a few examples of the elite sport?
So it is no coincidence that cricket is the first of the women's leagues in India to be broadcast as widely, right? And that is partly because that is where the market is. But if that visibility has happened, then that visibility has created the space for other things to happen.
Thank you, sir.
I think even the history of football, the soccer, as they meant for women, the way that America came into soccer much later in life, and before that, women's football was not that popular until it was the entry of the USA. First they had the World Cup there, then this proliferation of soccer, as they call it. I mean, the entrance of the American market and the American business model just transformed football in a very, very interesting ways, but much more visible because of that. So that was a very interesting moment, I think, in the history of sports broadcasting. But anyway, we can come back to Suman later on, and meanwhile go to Subhranshu, who teaches history in Sonarpur Mahavidyalaya, and he has been interested in sports, in the participation of women in rural areas, especially for a very long time, since I've known him, which is also a very long time. So it's looking forward to hear from Subhranshu.
Thank you, Nilanjana Di. Thank you, Ojita, on behalf of Media Communication and Cultural School for inviting me to share my experience. First of all, I would like to say that though I teach history in my college and I did my PhD on socio-cultural history of women's soccer in India, but here I am going to share some of my experience as a organizer, as I'm working as a sports coordinator in my college for last almost 1 decade. My college is situated in Sonarpur, that is just nearby Kolkata, but all of my students who participate in sports, almost all of them, they are from interior part of Sundarban and suburbs. And I was hearing here a lot of issues, and very rightly, just before me, Shumanda given some concern about this media exposure. But in reality, in rural area, challenges are a little bit different. See, these people, these girls especially, they are often, they're almost 90% of them, they're coming from very poor family. First generation learner, and in some cases they are also first generation players. In rural club sports and in primary school, they somehow able to perform better, and they gradually came in contact with some of the local coaching staff and so on, and they then introduced in the sporting arena of Kolkata Maidan. Now, if I name Jyotirmoyi Sikdar, Soma Bishwas, Pranati Nayak, Jhulan Goswami, they are also from rural area. And from 60s onwards, in our state, West Bengal, produced many of athlete players who not only represented India, but bagged some glory and gold in Asian Games, in World Championship, in World Cup cricket, and in women's football also, though we know that FIFA recognized football, women's football much later, only in 1991. Now, what I have observed, that these girls, they have got some constraints. First of all, I already mentioned that they have come from very poor family. Second major problem they face, that in society, even in rural area, even today, these sports girls, they are not seen very positively in their villages. Often, their family, I just came to know more of due to one or two my students. One is Atoshi Gayan. Currently, she is studying it 5th semester in my college. She is from a village nearby Taldi in Sundarban, and her story was very interesting. And from getting to know her personal life and difficulties, I came across what the actual situations there. So the third thing is that often these girls, their nearby people, relative, they came in their house and say, তোমার তো বয়স, তোমার মেয়ের বয়স হয়ে গেছে, তোমার মেয়ে দেখতে এত ভালো নয়, তো চলো আমরা তোমার মেয়ের একটা বিয়ের অ্যারেঞ্জমেন্ট করছি, যার সাথে বিয়ে দেবো তোমায় কিছু টাকা দেবো, তুমি কিছু টাকাও পাবে, তোমার মেয়ের বিয়ে হয়ে যায়. So also she told me, sir, one night she called me and she told me, sir, আপনি আমায় বাঁচান, আমার জোর করে বিয়ে দিয়ে দিয়েছে. So it was very awkward situations. I tried to contact with some of them, some nearby people and others. So I asked, my phone kotha bolo na, I asked them to come. And when on that way, one man appeared, and he told me that I am his uncle, I am her uncle. So আপনি আমার মেয়ের কেন বিয়ে দিতে বাধা দিচ্ছেন, আমার ভাইজি, আপনি কি আমার মেয়ের দায়িত্ব নেবেন? And you believe or not, from upstairs, Atoshi called me in my mobile and said, sir, this man is not my relative. This is a fake person. So I asked him to please produce your Aadhaar card, and that man ran away. See, it is happening in 2022. It is happening in Sonarpur. So, women trafficking, and trafficking in disguise of marriage, is a great issue that these girls face. Thirdly, Suppose they are taking train in the early morning, reaching Maidan or in nearby place where they can have training. In athlete in our state at present, the basic condition of our clubs, they are in pathetic condition. They are almost in Stone Age. You just leave all this gymnasium, sports medicine and others. What they have got? They have got one stopwatch, pack of glucose and some notebooks which they record their timings. Nothing else. Third and fourthly, these girls, they don't have any sporting icon. I asked them, you ever heard of Jyotirmoy Sikdar, P.T. Usha or no? I can recall one incident when I was taking her to Salt Lake Stadium for state meet. Pinky Pramanik was standing as she works in railway. She was standing on duty in railway station. So I asked her, 2 or 3 girls, do you know her? She is Pinky Pramanik. And very innocently Autosi said to me, oh acha, uni ki serial kore. So media, here comes the role of media. In our time, as I am born and brought up in rural place called Horipal locally, and in those times, newspaper had little bit news over this rural district games, state university games. Recently we concluded university games in Sai complex. There was one line in any television, any YouTube channel, any print media. No. So all these are their constraints. These girls facing actually in rural and suburb area. And so Shwanta was mentioning about this PT class. In our time in school, we have got physical education as subject. Now in our curriculum, it's no more any subject called physical education. We don't have any games teacher in government and government aided schools.
They will be speaking largely on sports journalism and sports media production. Before starting this extremely important session, I was just reminded of one incident that happened in India when eminent journalist Rajdeep Sardesai asked Sania Mirza, the tennis player, on the event of the release of her autobiography, that Sardesai asked her, I quote, amidst all the celebrityhood, when is Sania going to settle down? Is it going to be in Dubai? Is it going to be in any other country? What about motherhood? What about building a family? I don't see all that in your book. It seems like you don't want to retire just yet to settle down. Sania Mirza definitely was, actually she didn't blush or anything, but she retorted that you sound disappointed. I am not choosing motherhood over being number 1 in the world, but I'll answer your question anyway. That's the question I face all the time from the journalist as a woman, that all women have to face. The first is marriage and then it's motherhood. Unfortunately, that's when we are settled. And no matter how many Wimbledons we win and number 1s in the world we become, we don't become settled. Rajdeep immediately apologized and but the matter actually ended there. But this type of questioning, the question that a woman player, even if she's a superstar in the world of tennis, in the world of Indian sports, face all the time from sports journalism. So I just start this with this with the event that actually happened, and may I ask Elizabeth Ann Powell, Professor University, to talk on tackling gender bias in sports media production.
Yes.
Over to you. Yeah.
My name's Lizzie Powell, and I am a senior lecturer and also program leader in sports media production at Professor University. And within that role, I essentially we set up a brand new sports media degree which starts next year. So within that, we've been also working on a project called Her Story, Her Sport, and we're really kind of focused on this idea of her game, her story, being not just a project that is going to operate for the next year, but something that we're going to be kind of running throughout the years and hopefully will have a real impact. So my background is I used to work at the BBC in news and sports, and in terms of sports specifically, I've worked at the Olympic Games, the Commonwealth Games, and looking forward to working at the Olympic Games in Paris this summer. So when we talk about gender bias in sports journalism, what exactly do we mean when we say that? Well, essentially we're looking at how bias manifests itself in a range of disparities, and that's across all sorts of coverage. So that's language, resource allocation, stereotypes and pay as well. So in good news, our current coverage in India is particularly, it is on the rise, and internationally as well. So 15% of media coverage in 2022, and that's our last sort of good stats, has meant that, we're growing. It is something that's increasing. It's close to 20%, hopefully, by 2025. So again, you can see that rise is really quick. But however, there's still a huge journey to go on, and there's still a lot less than needs to be. There is a kind of, a lack of visibility and still a lack of support. Not all coverage is equal, and when I say that, what I mean is, well, the increased coverage is good, it's still not enough and is never going to be enough until that huge divide starts to level out. Events continue to be misrepresented and underrepresented. One of the things that we can really fall foul of focusing too much on is only using the big wins where we're going to be broadcasting. So maybe it might be a cricket final, or it could be a hockey final. And in the UK it's exactly the same. When the women's football team reached the final, there was a huge amount of coverage, which was fantastic to see. But with men's sports, still, that rise to success is across all sorts of different levels and across all sorts of different successes and failures. It isn't determined by how brilliantly that team is doing. They don't make a decision, well, this team has got to a final, therefore we'll dedicate a lot of resources. They might have just been a semi-final, a quarter-final, or even just that journey through the leagues. So that lack of consistent coverage is something really to focus on. It's not enough to say, well, we covered the final here and we've covered this. It's let's look at that year and how much coverage is being created. Media organisations are sending slimmed down crews, and when we say slimmed down crews, what we mean is they're not sending as many people to cover women's sports as they do for men's. So an example, for instance, in the last few weeks has been the men's rugby. They send the trucks, the satellite trucks, a lot of crew, a lot of people to work on the ground. With the women's rugby, they operated it virtually. So they'd sent only a fair few people down to the ground. Yes, they were able to provide coverage, but it wasn't the same standard of coverage as they did for the men's, and there weren't the same amount of people allocated to it. So whereas they might be able to turn around and say, yes, but we've covered this, we've ticked that box, we've we've done what we said we were going to do, which was cover the men's and the women's, but when you actually look at the level of coverage, the production value that went into the coverage, there's still huge disparities. In terms of marginalisation as well, you know, even across, when we talk about that coverage, we're also looking at slot times. So if you've covered a sport and if you've done a lot of production for that sport, when are you streaming it? When are you airing it? Now, any basketball championship game is always a prime time slot, but for the women's, they didn't opt for a prime time slot. Even though they knew that the demand was there, ESPN decided that they would reduce and not give it the same slot time that they had given to the men's, even though it averaged nearly 10 million viewers. So, you know, the demand was there. There was no reason for it not to have had exactly the same, and in fact, a better slot. When we look at the actual production side of women's sports, so how are we filming it, and in which ways are we filming it? So that objectivization is something that you have to be so careful of, and has to be at the front of any kind of skill set that you're giving to sports journalists. Often journalists will ask questions of female athletes that they just simply wouldn't ask of male athletes. How do you juggle your family life with being a professional sportswoman? How has this impacted on your family life at home? And even in commentary, they'll reference an athlete and then say, you know, who is married with 3 children. And very rarely do you get that with a male athlete. And those are things that might seem small differences, but they actually are really impactful. And so making sure that that language around it is also is very pertinent to the sport and not to... Oh, I'm just going to pause it once we get some... So this was a campaign. Oh. Yeah. So this was a campaign called Cover the Athlete, and this was tackling exactly that. So it was about making sure, making journalists aware that the questions that they ask female athletes have to be very similar to that of the male, because there is no reason for them to ask different questions. These are athletes. It doesn't matter that they're female athletes, that they're male athletes. And it was a really interesting test they did, where basically they asked the male athletes questions that had been asked of female athletes, just to see what their reactions would be.
You're getting a lot of fans here. A lot of them are female, and they want to know if you could date anyone in the world. Who would you date?
Any response to recent comments about your girlish figure?
Are you serious?
Removing your body hair gives you an edge in the pool. How about your love life?
How has your weight gain affected your mobility?
Have you heard the controversy over your helmet hair?
Get ready to see some great biceps, tiny tanks, and more.
I wonder if his dad said to him when he was younger, listen, you're never going to be a hooker, you're never going to be a Beckham, so you have to compensate for that.
He really does have the kind.
Can you give us a twirl and tell us about your outfit?
What?
Oh, what are you talking about, man? Oh, wow, man.
Can you give us a twirl and tell us about your outfit?
A twirl like...
A twirl, a pyramid, here we go.
So that's a really important campaign that really highlights...
How would male athletes react?
So a really interesting campaign that actually They are continuing. It is making small differences. Hopefully you can see what, yeah. It is making small differences, but still there are still kind of trends and patterns that journalists fall into. And although in some respects some of it is funny, actually when you are that athlete and you have gone through years of training, you have reached the pinnacle of your career, to then be asked some foolish question is humiliating and something that should never happen now and needs to change. So how do we start fixing this problem? Well, there is, as we've discussed, an increased coverage of women's sports, making sure that we use gender-neutral language and challenging stereotypes, but also promoting kind of initiatives like the Women's Sports Media Initiative that look to address gender bias in sports by advocating for a more equitable coverage of women's athletes. The BBC have committed to greater coverage. They did a campaign where they looked at how are we going to kind of challenge what we're just creating now, but create more. And again, they are committed to a certain amount of hours of women's sports that they want to achieve. The danger with those sort of schemes is that if the BBC says that we're committing to however many hours per week of women's sports, what it doesn't drill down to is the detail and the level of production value that goes into the women's sports. So again, when I was referring to the women's rugby, where they sent a virtual production down, whereas for the men's rugby they sent the full production team. Well, they'll still be able to say that they have covered the game, but again, it's going back to how have they covered it, what resources have they used, and what's the production value been like. So women's sports in India, I'm sure, as you know, is going through a fantastic kind of level of development. Success in the Cricket Women's World Cup and the T20 has meant that cricket is showing an uprise. Badminton is another sport that has achieved massive success at international level. Tennis is one that has now produced several talented players who are on the global stage. Wrestling, with a strong tradition in India, now more female wrestlers have been making their mark in national and international competitions. Shooting, women's shooting has gained prominence in India, with shooters competing at international level. Boxing is a new one that is on the rise, with several boxers winning medals at events like the Olympics and World Championships. And they're showing a rise in people being involved within the sport. And obviously in athletics, Indian female athletes have been excelling even more so recently in long jump and discus throw. So that's just a few examples of professional women's sports in India. And there are far more. A new generation is excited to be involved. And really we're hoping that with this project, we're able to kind of, make sure that we're reflecting that new generation. Fogat is an amazing, I'm sure you know her, when winning gold at both the Commonwealth and the Asian Games. I think it's a really interesting story to show you. So I've just got a couple of minutes of her journey, which I think is very inspirational. So one of the things that Fogat has recently also been involved in is highlighting the allegations of sexual harassment of female athletes. So she's been able to use her position as a voice in women's sports to also support and fight sexist attitudes towards women in sports. And it's really, she's an incredible person to not have just been through a journey herself, particularly in an area where the BBC did a survey and wrestling was one that came up. A third of respondents in India identified it as being a sport unsuitable for women. It was wrestling, boxing and weightlifting. So exactly the disciplines where Indian sportswomen are actually shining and excelling in. So now for her to be able to use her position to do greater good, even though, you know, beyond her actual personal success, is a really exciting place for her to be. So it's responsibility. So sports media production has to be responsible, allowing for smaller audiences. So looking beyond, are the viewing figures going to pull in enough people, and actually focusing on, are we taking this to enough people, and flipping that conversation. Because if we only rely on creating sports media content for where we think there are going to be big audiences, we'll never allow those small audiences to grow, and we'll never take it to new audiences. The only way you can start to build something is by starting it. So I think there has to be a greater commitment to sports despite results, not just focusing on those finals, but also working with entertainment outlets as well. Now I know it's probably not the most highbrow film, but I really enjoyed it. And what this film was able to do was not just tell a great story. It was also about provoking more of a reaction and more interest. And in fact, the rise in women's hockey was quite considerable after it. We had a similar film in the UK called Bend It Like Beckham, and there was a considerable leap in women's football after it. So the impact of film, entertainment, light entertainment can make a massive difference, and it shouldn't be underestimated. Those journeys that the athletes go on within the films actually have a lasting impact and a lasting effect. So within media production, if we can combine forces with entertainment as well, then that makes for an even more powerful flow. The writer actually only saw that newspaper article, and it was on the back pages, and he himself felt angry, which is when he started to write the film and came up with the story. So, you know, it has a huge impact, and it only took one writer to realise that for the ripple effect. So India's sport has a really bright future, undoubtedly, but sports media production, we have a crucial way part to play. So really, women's cricket has now just gained equal pay, which is a huge step forward, but there still needs to be a far more powerful women's ecosystem, so that for your generation, your emerging generation, you are going to be working in a landscape potentially where, you know, that disparity between men's and women's sport has reduced, and you can be part of that kind of journey to reduce it, which is what Her Game, Her Story is really all about. It's about kind of making sure that we can kind of start to drive the difference. I've been on campus here only a couple of days, but I've seen just an amazing amount of spirit among the students. Some great kind of demonstrations of opinion and actually, you know, within the academics as well. So for us to be able to combine with your university, at Bath Spa we like to kind of channel exactly the same, that path of kind of questioning and querying and pushing. So it's a huge privilege to be working on the project with you. I hope that, you know, our journeys together as change makers, I think, are undoubtedly going to be as successful, hopefully, as the project itself. So thank you.
First of all, thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I just want to know that when the representation of women's sports are not very much larger compared with the men's sports in the mainstream medias, do the separate media outlets for the women's sports only, for example, take if you take the Alex Morgan and the other sports person created an alternative sports journal called Just Women's Sports in America. Are these kind of sports in media or outlet helps in promoting women's sports?
Yeah. So the question is, is it impactful?
Yes.
Yeah, so what, if the same production companies are doing it?
I think he's talking about
The specific?
women's magazines, which cover
Only women's sports.
So does it have an impact?
Yes.
Yes, yeah,
Magazines
absolutely.
and portals now, web portals as well.
So
okay.
should broadcasting also
But
do that?
people
Would
are
that
not
be
even
better?
aware of all these separate portals because
Right, okay.
that also needs a meta awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, so specialist kind of areas really of production.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that with, now there's a huge amount of variety of sources that people can go to find women's sports, and there's particularly on social platforms, women's only sports channels and magazines and lots of kind of chat areas and portals as well that they can kind of get that context and knowledge. I think what's important is the danger in not having it too mainstream is that it starts to become too niche and it starts to become something that you need to look for to find as opposed to always being there. So if you create content from a production company perspective that is solely women's sports, then as long as you're getting that on a main broadcaster, that's fine. That works well because you become a specialist. But the streaming has to be generalist because otherwise you're always going to be marginalising it a little bit. So it's a really fine balance to have. You want the groups and you want the production companies to specialise because that means that they'll create more output, but not at the detriment to then other big organisations saying, oh, well, we don't need to do that because so-and-so's doing that. Because the smaller group might not have as big a reach and as big an audience. So it's about getting that mix really right.
And another thing is, in 2024 Olympics, it has been said that almost 50% of the participants will be the women. So when we look at the sports coverage of the male journalist and the female journalist, how they have looked into the women's sports have been quite different in their approaches and even in the terminologies. So do you think if the increased number of women's journalists will create much more safe place for women's sports coverage so that it can be reached out to the broader audience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really key that you have representation across, and that's across kind of disabilities as well, and making sure that if your competitors are 50-50 and your audience, which we know, globally are, in that your journalists are as well. And it's really, it's far more, it's important that you don't just have women journalists working on women's sports, because again, you can kind of fall into a pattern then where you're, again, kind of making it one area that's, the women journalists cover the women's sports, the men's journalists cover the male sports. You need to still get that mix, but I think representation-wise, as long as we can keep pushing for more female journalists, and also making it that it is something that you're not just going to cover women's sports, you are going to cover a broad range of sports. And the same for the male journalists as well, in making sure that they are also covering. And that stretches out to kind of all sorts of areas, LGBTQ as well. So making sure there's always that representation, because people ask different questions, and everyone from different cultures and from different backgrounds.
There is an element here, of course, of a female sports journalist. Is that different? Do we expect women to have a different level of technical ability than men? Well, 60 years ago we probably did. Now, not so much. I'd certainly say that my experience of 18-year-old undergraduates coming into our film and television courses, which is a fairly even balance of men and women, there's not a lot of difference. It's more about their individual attitude to dealing with technical things rather than a gender split. Apart from perhaps that some of the boys will dominate the bigger, more expensive, better looking cameras because they look and they'll hog them. But once women have got them out of their hands and get some tuition on it themselves, then there's not a lot of difference in between the men and the women and their ability with the broadcast technology. But there are two sorts of shifts going on, or have been going on over the last few decades. Professional broadcast equipment has been getting, quotes, simpler to operate, and of course consumer technology has been rocketing ahead and become very powerful in our pockets. We are able to shoot feature films on our iPhones. It has been done. Whether you want to continue doing it is a different matter. So 40 years ago, if you were going out to be a journalist on location to do a television report, you probably would have had a two-person crew with you. It used to be called a two-man crew, and it probably was. But the camera, whilst looking not that different from what we see today, can only produce a picture. It doesn't record anything. So the camera operator is connected by a thick wire, multiple wires, a cable, into the big bag that the sound recordist is carrying, which is the actual video recorder. And of course this affects how things are made. You need those two people there. It particularly affects it if you suddenly want to run across a road, because they're tied together, which is not very clever. But the point really is that these are quite technical, engineering almost jobs at this stage. The technology requires an engineering level of knowledge, and the BBC used to train these people over weeks and weeks on residential courses to have the pseudo-engineering ability to operate this sort of equipment. And the roles, the jobs, were very delineated. You were either a camera operator or a sound recordist or a video editor, and you never crossed over those divides. Just to prove it, this is the sort of video editing equipment. Our news reporters' tape might have been on a cassette that would have gone in the machine on the bottom right there. But in the studios, mastering of television programs was on open reel video still, and those big cabinets were big because they had lots and lots of electronics in, and there was usually somebody there tweaking the things inside every time you did a picture edit. And you needed two machines to do the edit, so it was incredibly expensive and very cumbersome and slow. Today, in the broadcast side, of course, things have got a lot smaller. This camera shown here can do a quality of picture that was far ahead of what the chap in the other picture was holding. Not surprisingly, we can do 4K video or whatever. The compact form means that a video journalist or a member of production in Britain, I often call them producer directors, who they really belong in the production office, but they take a camera out and film or shoot themselves. They could even be coping with the sound as well. And it has changed broadcasting because the cameras are so small. You can send them somebody along with them, they're cheap. You send a member of production along, and they sit in the back room of some organisation, and we watch a story unfold over many weeks. You can afford to put that person and that camera in that location for a long, long time. Sports journalism, maybe you get access to a sporting club, and you can send somebody to be there with a small camera, and they can be there every training session, at every board meeting, at every argument over the months of the season, and you get a different story to what we used to get. And on the editing side, we can all edit now on laptop computers, and it's really been a couple of organisations, Apple with Final Cut Pro and Adobe with Premiere Pro, have pushed from the consumer end of the market into broadcasting, and we now use those pieces of software in broadcasting. And they invented the sort of drag and drop, you know, oh, I like that bit of video, I'll put it over there in my program. A method which never happened in broadcast editing before. And it enables a fleet of footness, a fleetness of foot. We can do things very quickly, we can do things in journalistic terms. That means we do it very late. We push ourselves closer to the deadline, and so the newer technology that has come partly from consumer technology enables that deadline to be pushed further and further forward. Oops. Excuse me. On the consumer side, technology, this is 1980s or thereabouts with a VHS video recorder. I'm not quite sure how things are organised here, but we had about 4 television channels at the time. in England, and you could set the timer on the domestic video recorder like this and record your favourite programme and watch it whenever you liked. But you'd only be able to record one, because there was only one timer in the machine. That was the first time we were able to move away from it. On the video, on the camera side, this was very expensive in the domestic scene, and only real enthusiasts would have had a video camera that could work in any great quality, and maybe at this stage many people would still be using Super 8 film as a home format. But now, of course, if we go out to the video recorder, we don't have video recorders anymore. We have streaming services and catch-up services on the internet. All the big British TV channels have catch-up services, so we don't need to think when we're going to watch something. We know it's there. And the streamers, of course, are working the same way. We know that it's there. The middle problem now, I guess, is when somebody tells you you must watch a particular program or film, and you have to ask, was it on Netflix, or is it on Disney Plus, or is it on Amazon Prime? It's on the one I'm not subscribing to, obviously, that's where it'll be. But it has completely changed how we consume. And of course, in terms of consumer end of shooting, then we can be on our iPhones, or other brands are available. I considered bringing a nice camera with me on this trip to India that I bought about 8 years ago. And I looked at my phone in my pocket and thought, well, that can do so much more. So that's where the technology is. Yes, about 10 years ago, somebody said we've made a television program or a movie on an iPhone. It's a bit like, well, you can shoot a movie on an iPhone, but you can also live on pizza, but it's not very advisable. Yeah. So the professional technologies does still exist. But it's been pushed, that's got a lot better as the consumer materials have got better. So these two shifts, broadcasting technology gets simpler, consumer technology gets better. Is this something in the middle where we should be teaching our students? Is there a sweet spot now of people who know technology before they come to any formal training, and the professional kit has come down, if you like, to the level of the novice? I'm not so sure. I think the middle is more like what I've termed in the last couple of days, and it's not a beautiful term, the craft gap. It's not about the technology, it's about what you do with it. Yeah? There's a little problem with the consumer technology in that I find young students come to me and they may use their phones for lots of social media and producing lots of content in that sense. But they also live in this world where everything comes without any wires, literally wireless. Yeah? So we expect things to just happen in the palm of our hand. And the students come to us without any realization that how in the professional world, actually, you need to connect that camera to that recorder, or in the studio, connect 3 or 4 cameras to all the kit in the studio. You can use radio mics, but you probably need at some stage to use wired mics, and we need to make sure that there's a lot of wires from the audio mixer to get everything to join up with the video pictures and all the rest of it. So it's not quite as simple in this middle section than you might be led to believe. But I do think that there's an important point of don't get hung up on the knobs and the switches and the settings deep in the menu in modern cameras and the like. Think about what you're going to do with it. It's not about the buttons, which disappoints some people. It's about what you do actually with it. So we'll just have a look at 3 sections: audio recording and interviewing, self-shooting, sound and video, and editing. Yeah. So imagine a radio person or somebody just collecting an audio interview going out. Yes, you have to get the right levels for the sound and avoid popping on the microphone and background noise and all that sort of thing. But if we understand what the microphone does, whether it's one that picks up all the way around in equal sensitivity, or whether it's one that is very directional, we know what we can do with it. And there's an art to actually almost creating a mix before you put anything down on your recording medium. if you are doing a pitch-side interview and there's a noisy crowd, but you want to talk to a coach or a player or somebody, you can, with one microphone, get close enough to the voice that the background noise will quieten down. At the same time, you are making decisions about how much do I want this background noise. If I don't have any background noise, nobody will know I'm here. We have to use the sound around us to paint the picture. Somebody has often said, you know, radio is like television, but the pictures are better, because we use our technology to create the picture in the listener's mind. The important bit. Video, yes, you will have to be worried about exposure and colour balance and focus, but other things are important too and relate them more directly to the story. How we lit our subject. Have we made it dramatic because we're doing something, we want to do something dramatic and make a big point? Or do we make it artistic because we're in a mode of being considered and making people look beautiful? Or are we just snatching an interview at the side of a pitch and we'll get what lighting we get? Yeah? The framing of a shot means something. If we are framing somewhere like here, we think we're being intimate or we're being challenging. If we're looser, we're more relaxed. So these things mean something to the story. And also, we should encourage our students to think in sequences when they're shooting video. Not just popping off lots of different shots, but if we're doing a story about a high jumper, we need to see various parts of that action, them waiting, considering, concentration, them feet running, a close-up shot of the bar perhaps as they go over it or not. And how does that all fit together as a sequence? Because it's really difficult to show something if you only have disjointed shots. So these are, as they say, craft skills. And the craft of the editor, often people say that a movie or such is actually made in the edit. And it took me a long time to realise, well, this means surely not. You've spent years scripting this thing and making a storyboard and then shooting it and spent oodles of money doing so. How can the thing be created in the edit? Well, it is, because every single cut you make in the edit changes the story or changes the emphasis of the pace. And you make all sorts of choices in an edit, even in a shorter piece, excuse me, about how you are juxtaposing comments. If you've interviewed 2 or 3 people, if we put this comment from person A and immediately challenge it with the one from person B, we're changing the feel and changing what we're saying, really, as broadcasters. Lovely. One final thing, there's a very small example here. On the left is a reporter's audio recorder. Lizzie, I'm sure, has done one of these quite a bit. I certainly did. Records on 1/4 inch reel-to-reel tape, and you get 15 minutes, that's it, okay? And then you take it back and you edit it with a razor blade, and it's destructive editing. Once you cut the tape, you're going to have a lot of trouble if you want to put it back together again. On the right is a modern Zoom card, SD card recorder. It's got a built-in microphone. You can just hold that up and you get something. And of course, your length of recording is as long as the card is big. Yeah, so a different size of the card will give you more and more recording. And then you can take the card away into some other device and edit, and it is not destructive editing. And one of the big leaps for news organisations has been with card recording in sound and vision, is you put it into a computer and then anybody can access it. So if you're connected, you can edit it in Calcutta, but maybe also your fellow journalists in Delhi can also edit it at the same time and do a different cut. Because over here you want a more local story. But the important thing between those two bits of technology, which are decades apart, is that they basically do the same thing. And what we have to learn is not about the tech particularly, but the craft of knowing enough about the tech and being able to operate it to be able to do the job, which is being the journalist and being a radio journalist and managing the audio in this case and making it as creative as possible. Thank you very much.
lunch? Okay. So we have just 10 minutes in our hand and we'll then break for lunch. We can take some questions for this beautiful presentation, brilliant presentation.
It's not a question, but just an kind of an observation. Is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, they were talking about the sports production as an artifice, and especially talking about, I'm so happy that you are actually also talking about sound as a different category with which one has to also negotiate, something that is actually treated separately. It's not in sync always. One has to think of that separately, sound effects. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the gallery was all empty, but all those live commentaries, were coupled with the sound of the crowd cheering. And you took some time to realize that after actually watching one or two matches, is that there's nobody to be seen around, but the commentary is just the same as it used to be, So actually recorded sound of the crowd cheering were actually added to it, which actually makes you realize once again that when we listen to a commentary, for instance, it's not naturally the sound of the crowd always. I mean, there might actually be an element of artifice also there, which might be kind of added, increasing the volume and decreasing the volume, and now you start doubting, especially something that happened to me, is that it might also be the case, is that what we actually listen to is whether it is the natural coming out of the ground or not. But anyway, I mean, that is just a specific case. But once again, I think thanks for drawing our attention to the fact that it's an artifice, it's a production, it's something, there's a lot of art here, The feel of the ground is not actually what comes out of the ground necessarily. A lot of things are engineered and produced, and that's really important.
If I could just make a point on that. So, it's very interesting. I was listening a few months ago to a podcast which was about sound production in television, and we were talking to a chap who'd worked with Sky Television in the UK as they took over the coverage of Premier League football many years ago now, and they actually sat down and worked out how to really give more in the sound to the viewer at home. And yes, they have microphones all the way around the ground, and they managed to isolate the very sound of a ball being kicked on the pitch. And they did, I don't really understand it, a massive amount of algorithm type stuff went on to emphasize this and to give it a little sound envelope of its own thing, produced in minuscule detail, so that any time that we heard that sound, it got an extra thump, if you like, so that it really felt like something was happening. And I suppose in a sense that, the ball being kicked is the essence of football, and that was, it's amazing how much effort went into amplifying the experience, shall we say.
Hello. First of all, welcome in our country, sir, and welcome to our university. So, my question is basically, nowadays the podcast has very much in use, and the other thing is artificial intelligence. So, earlier days when the news reporting was live, it was clearly known that the things that are being said is completely true and it is being said over there only. But nowadays when the podcasts are coming into play, we don't know what are those are completely recorded, how much of it is added, or how much of it is scripted. Many of the podcasts can be scripted and can be biased, personal biased. And sir, the artificial intelligence, how can we be aware of that the news or the content that are being sold in the news right now, or the reporting or the reels, Instagram reels are nowadays a very great role in presenting any kind of information. So how can we be aware of those things, and how can we be that much authentic that we are getting an authentic news or content?
I think it's really, again, really interesting. I was listening to something on the radio only the other day that is a whole series is talking about AI and what are we going to do about it? Because I think the truth of the matter at the moment is we don't know. when stuff has been made by AI. You know, we're probably all unaware that we've been consuming stuff that's AI already. So legally and everything, governments are behind on this sort of stuff. As a fan and ex-employee of the BBC, not really as a journalist, I would tend to say that the old news organisations, whilst much maligned at the moment, do generally have a responsibility which they take seriously of checking what it is they're putting out. And certainly the BBC has a department that checks any user-generated content for its authenticity. When we see a big event happen somewhere, they try really hard to make sure that stuff that suddenly springs up all over the internet is real. But I think, as a personal consumer, it's going to be really difficult to tell whether we're being fed AI-generated stuff. Yeah, very much so.
Any more questions? We can take one such.
Yeah, possibly one.